Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. So, today will be quite a different video. I will be responding to the new Call of Duty trailer, of all things, mainly because it really inspired an ethical understanding an ethical dilemma that I hadn't really considered before, or at least I hadn't considered to such an extreme. Now, I'm going to be discussing this as someone who is a philosopher, but also a gamer and someone who's worked in a game store. I've been an employee. Hello, everyone, and welcome. So, yes, as I was saying, we will be discussing the Call of Duty Modern Warfare trailer. Not because I'm hyped or anything like that, although it does look pretty sick, but rather because I'm worried about the effect that it could have on children. Now, I'm not normally someone who advocates for, video games and violence or any of this, but it's come to my attention that maybe I was a bit lighthearted when it come to this, and that maybe I should have given it more consideration than I did in the past. That being said, I think that the media sensationalized this and that video games aren't necessarily bad. Now, I know a lot of critics of this video will instantly say, but Lewis, Call of Duty Modern Warfare isn't 18. As if all of our kids aren't playing it, and as if, you didn't play 18s before you were 18. It's like, I was like a very young child, and I remember watching Starship Troopers, much to my mother's dismay. And, children have older siblings. They get a hold of these games. They play these games. It happens. And I'm not actually going to advocate for any stricter controls on games or anything like that, because it doesn't work, right? Prohibition doesn't work. What I'm going to advocate for is having tougher conversations with our children about ethics. Now, that is probably the hardest thing to advocate for, because a lot of people are buying games for their children so that they can just get some peace, right? You work in game or game station or any of these shops, and you just see the employees. They're normally talking to a very tired parent who's just like, get them the game, please, just put it through the till. They'll leave us alone when they put it through the till. And that's kind of like a lot of the people buying games. It's almost like you buy the kid the game to shut the kid up so that you can get on with all the important stuff you've got to do. And, the kids just wants a game, that it's like, oh my God. And there's a lot of hype around it. Now, I was part of the generation when Call of Duty really started to become big, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. That was massive when I was in school. Obviously, none of us were 18, and I got it because I think my brother got it, and I just played it when he wasn't. But and my mom absolutely knows nothing of technology when it comes to these things, so it just happens, and I think it's just clear that it happens. Where it's like apparently video games are supposed to turn children into murderers. I was like, how ridiculous! If this was true, then half of the area in which I live would be psychotic, psycho killers shooting people thinking they're in World War II. Or, Afghanistan or wherever it is, like the games we're playing, because Call of Duty World at War was also a big one. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is that clearly there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of hype around these supposed dangers. And yeah, and I think that the worst part is that maybe we're not even considering the true threats that these games have. So, am I coming through okay, guys? Because I've just got an error message. Am I skipping or anything like that? Okay, good. All right, I'm a little quiet. I'll turn myself up then. Yeah. So then. So yeah. I was more worried about the frames. It says it might be skipping some frames, so I'm gonna have to keep an eye on that. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is that maybe we're not focusing on the right problems. Like, I think school shooters, they're not shooting kids because they played Call of Duty, right? They're not shooting kids because they've played Halo or something like that. But is there any culpability? Well, possibly. I mean, if we're talking about the mentally vulnerable, like the mentally vulnerable kids, like playing 18s when they shouldn't be, then yeah, like we can see that maybe these kids just, they needed maybe even a few more years of development, and they might have had some increased mental fortitude. Maybe it was brought around at a time of their life in which they were quite vulnerable. Maybe they were being bullied severely, and it seemed like a solution at the time because, it works for the heroes in the game. And this is the point. There's the heroes in the game. And it's the selling of a glorified notion of reality that's most concerning for me. Has very little to do with the actual game, the gameplay, and the the actual likelihood of these games causing like absolute trauma to individuals, forcing them, to go on a massive killing spree. Instead, what I think is more likely I'm getting error messages, so I'm going to try and just close everything I can, guys, just to make sure that this comes through absolutely fine. Don't want you missing any of the goodness. Right. So hopefully that'll fix it. Anyway, so yeah, so what I thought was the real issues here. Well, so first we have school shooting and violence, right? And I think that's kind of blown out of proportion. Like, I think that's really blown out of proportion. Not something I think that we'll really need to worry about so much, but I think it's got more, we'll have to consider more of the vulnerable children and identifying children who would be more vulnerable and more susceptible to violence, and we need to be careful of that. Next is military glorification and patriotism. Now, I see this as a real threat to our children, not because, they're going to go and shoot schools, but because they're going to get shot, they're going to go and risk their lives for a country that, and in wars that mightn't be just in the first place, and they mightn't actually be considering of whether they want to fight for the country, whether it is just and moral to do what they are doing. And if they come to the conclusion that it is, that's fine, but it's whether they're actually asking the questions and whether we're encouraging children to even talk about it, talk about what would be going on in the game in the first place, because it can deliver a message that is one-sided. And sometimes it can even deliver a message which leads to maybe the opposite, and like radicalism. There's a lot of people that think Thanos is right, for God's sake. So, people are easily influenced, and I think it's clear that we need to be careful about how we're influencing our children. I mean, I know it's an 18, but the concepts that are being discussed are breaching, the adult sphere, and they're clearly hitting my children. So we need to discuss ethical conversations. What we need to do is really have a strong ethical conversation with our children about what is right or wrong in the first place, and whether, what a just war might be in the first place. These are questions that, because they're alienated from our children, we blame video games, but we're not questioning the fictions that are popping up in their heads to brutality. Like, kids being hardened to, I mean, and I don't know if you had this as a kid. Don't get me wrong. I know school's a horrible place, and it kind of twists and warps your mind a little bit when you're in it, because it's almost survival of the fittest. Someone throws you into a jungle, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of kids were unsympathetic to what was going on in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, in relation to the Iraqis and the Afghans, but also in relation to our own troops. And I think that is because they were playing these games. I think they were made hardened to the violence. Like, it was something that they saw every day in one respect. I mean, it's just a different kind of understanding. I mean, I remember having conversations with kids when I was like 16, and people were like, oh, I'm going to join the military. And like, some other kid would come along and go like, you don't respond, right? And it was this idea, like, you've got to like, and they'd be like, oh yeah, like, you've got to like kind of bring people back to reality and stuff like that. But, sometimes people like just already are associating it with reality. And they're already in the situation where it's not actually, giving them this ridiculous notion of, I'm going to go shoot a school. But instead, maybe it's just, oh, well, this is just what happens every day. People get blown up. Why should I care? You just get used to it. You don't like think, well, maybe we need to fight against these injustices that are constantly being perpetrated against the broader society and the global community. And can we say that the news does not do this? And the news, like, every day, like, propagates like the suffrage. They say it in a serious tone. They're like, 5 people have been blown up in Afghanistan, or something like that. And it's just like, but they say it so regularly and in such a way that it becomes just reiterated like information, where it's just like, well, someone's been blown up, like what? But we never ask like, are we doing anything about it? Are we why have they been blown up? What caused the wars that have led to here? Like, the broader political and philosophical questions around the issues that are clearly impacting current events, they're never actually discussed in the news. It is only the shallow, like, most basic understanding. Now, I'm not saying the news has to give like a right or wrong answer, but they should at least make us aware of the broader ethical ramifications of the sphere in which they speak of. And another thing I wanted to mention with the military glorification is just patriotism. Does patriotism not do the exact same thing as games? I mean, like, a lot of, like, for example, I wanted to be in the Marines, and it wasn't really Call of Duty that made me want to be in the Marines when I was a young man. It was, well, one, history, and having a family that were involved in the military. And there's also a glorification of World War II and this honour and respect we show for the fallen, because we know that they were defending their families. But we never ask whether these wars are the same as those wars, and whether the men fallen then would have been willing to fight the wars today. And these are the kind of questions that I want. These are the kind of conversations I want to kind of propagate within families, because what we need to do is have, mothers, fathers, and even in schools, like teachers and so on, having conversations with kids and encouraging conversations between children just about whether this is justified behavior, and whether it would be like, whether we should be doing something about it as the citizens of the civilized society that is committing these actions. I mean, it might be very well that we can understand that there is defensive actions that take place. Like, sometimes there are defensive actions that take place, but can we tell the difference? And if we can't, then we've got a problem, haven't we? I've got some specific stuff to bring up with this trailer. Okay, the trailer itself, like, it says some things, right? And I only heard it when I was listening to like YouTube, and it come on as a like an advert, and like I was listening and I was just like, whoa, like, some kids listening to bloody, I don't know, whatever music he's into, and then suddenly gets an advert for, Call of Duty. And yeah, like, it does propagate some dodgy ethical conceptions. Another thing I wanted to bring up was the army adverts, the UK's army adverts. I don't know if anyone's heard this, but the UK released army adverts that were related to Binge Gamers and aiming at Binge Gamers in the first place. Now, when we're talking about people playing military games and then aiming adverts at those individuals who are playing those games, and in the advert he's not playing Call of Duty, but the point is that, one, how desperate has our military became that we are now aiming adverts at Binge Gamers. I mean, come on, like that's not who I want. That's not who I want to. I don't want to think of like those nerds defending the country. Are you joking? Like, oh my god, I want to actually win a war. Thanks. And two, like is it not disturbing that we're kind of setting people up to have the mindset of going into these conflicts, like not as into necessarily understand what they're going to be expected in war, because the games aren't preparing them for war, but the games do prepare them for an understanding of military like subordination and military like appreciation that leads them to join. And another thing I wanted to bring up was that how could these people, like, you imagine you're a 16-year-old lad, you're too young to play Call of Duty, but you're old enough to join the army. I mean, how strange is that? And I say lad, I mean it could be a lass as well. It's just obviously the primary demographic that does join the military is men particularly. Yeah, but it is young people in general. So I hope that, you know, it's recognized that all of this is transferable. So the first thing I wanted to play for is the new Call of Duty trailer. And then after that, I wanted to posit it with a discussion on someone who has real life experience involving what's in the trailer. And then I was going to play the new adverts. So give it a second and I'll get this ready. Okay. Is it still dropping frames, guys? If it is dropping frames, do you want us to restart the stream, or is it okay? Am I coming through okay? Like, can you understand me sentences? I usually don't have this problem. Hey, Chris. Yeah, so, like, if anyone could let us know, like, other... Right, so is it understandable? Like, do you want us to start the stream again? All right, good on your end. Well, I'll just keep an eye on it. If it gets too bad, guys, I might restart the stream, but hopefully it's not too bad. Right. Right. Okay then. Here we go. I'm gonna turn myself down because this might be a bit loud.
The rules have changed. There's a fine line between right and wrong. And somewhere in the shadows, they send us in to find them.
126 actual. Target is in the main house. You have execute authority.
Bravo 6. Going dark.
Start clear!
Victor 6-4, green light.
Chemical weapons are now in the wild.
Foreman copies that.
These guys, hostiles are not intimidated.
Get to safety, go!
So yeah, I hope that you can kind of see why I'm pulling this into question. This particular what's the word, like the advert, right? Like, you know, like trailer, because out of every single video game I've seen, it's never actually raised the ethical ambiguity of warfare and then resolved it by saying it within the same video, by saying like, okay, so there is a fine line between right and wrong in warfare. All right, everyone knows that. You know, all's fair in love and war and all that, right? We're told this stuff as children. And we know that war can be hell and all of this. But never have I seen an advert that says, you know, we get dirty so the world stays clean. That's the mission. And it's like, too far. You've went too far, right? And I thought a good way to juxtapose that video, like that trailer, was to show someone very different. Okay, arguing the exact opposite, but from real life experience. Okay, now, like, you know, funnily enough, like, someone in the comments has said, like, smoking in a video game. That was actually one of the things I thought of. Like, I was like, you know, like, that I know they're shooting people and stuff. That's part of the game. But the smoke in there, like, oh, we're gonna, like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but we don't even allow, like, adverts on cigarette packets now. Like, we try and keep them, like a lot of people keep trying to argue for them to be clear, but we're allowing, like, you know, characters that are the main characters in games, you know, they've got a cigar and they're just like, I'm really cool, definitely want to be like me, kids, I'm gonna go and shoot some people and we're gonna smoke. And it's just one of those it's just one of those issues. Now, I mean, obviously it's aimed at 18-year-olds. That's the idea. Like, we're talking, it's not supposed to be aimed at children. But it is definitely appealing to children. Like, whether they like it to or not. Like, that's the way it works. Like, we know kids play these games. So, we know that these, you know, characters have an influence on the overall sphere. And this is the whole thing. So this is what it's comes down to philosophically. That video games and, you know, sources of media have a way of affecting what's called the third dimension of power. Now, the third dimension of power, like, influences, like, our aesthetics, like, our aesthetic ideals, and in which we can associate ourselves with characters in real life, right? Like, and how we want to be in real life with the characters in a game. Now, I mean, like, bloody Harry Potter does this, for God's sake, you know? Like, there'll be a kid running around, like just pretending to be Harry Potter, waving a wand and stuff like that. Like, it doesn't necessarily cause any harm, but, like, it can. And we know it can. So we need to be somewhat careful, especially when we're showing a broad trailer. We're not necessarily showing, like, what's in the video game. We're showing, you know, a trailer which will affect children in general. And a lot of these things, right, I don't know about you, right, guys, but I'm going to be streaming World of Warcraft soon, like, with one of my friends. And I used to love World of Warcraft, right? And in the new World of Warcraft trailer, one of the newer ones, the Banshee Queen, like, there's this whole thing where the Banshee Queen's watching, like, I played Horde, and yeah, the Banshee Queen as you know, like, fighting these people or whatever, and then next thing you know, like, someone gets like the arrow, they get taken, like, arrows in them. It might be Salfang, and then, like, she has this moment where she just looks out on the battlefield, and it just like she has this, like, really deep moment and all that, and then she goes down, she yells for the Horde, and, like, I swear to God, I had a tear, like, there. I was like, for the Horde. Like, I was like, for the Horde. Uh, it's just funny because these things are able to influence us. Like, I'm an adult and I'm sat there and I'm like, that was powerful. Maybe I'm just emotional or whatever, but I was just like, wow, that was pretty visceral. Like, I felt like it gave us an experience there. And that's why I think it's important. Like, I don't want to ban Call of Duty, guys. Like, I don't want to stop Call of Duty games. Like, man, like, I enjoy games. I don't want to be starting censoring, like, expressions and, like forms of what I would call forms of art, right? Consumable art, very consumable art, but, you know, forms of art. Now, at the same time, I do think these companies should, like, consider what they're doing. Like, you know, don't be reckless. But what's more important than all that is having the correct conversations with our children so that they know better in the first place. That these games aren't warping their minds because we've already talked to them about it. We've already talked to them, like, about reality in the first place. Am I dropping frames all the time? Because if I am, I'm just going to restart the stream. The audio is 100% fine. All right, once in a while my cam freezes up, we can hear us. Okay. Well, I mean, if it's not too bad, like, all right, I'll keep going. But, like, if it is bad, guys, just let us know and I'll just restart it. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, I'll sort it out. Anyway, like, so the next thing I want to show you guys is Ben Griffin talking at the Oxford Union. So this guy's an ex-SAS soldier, and he gives a speech where he says, "We will not fight for Queen and country" at the Oxford Union. And I thought that it was really, really powerful. The link for it is actually in the description if you want to watch it in your own time. But what I thought was better is that it kind of juxtaposes the position that Call of Duty points out. Like, this idea of, like, we find right and wrong in, like, the pits of Afghanistan. Well, yeah, he did, and he came to the conclusion that what we're doing is wrong, you know? So, yeah, guys, I'm going to play that for us now.
Fight for Queen and country. What does that even mean? It is a jingoistic phrase dreamt up by some propaganda merchant intent on stoking the fire of that false religion patriotism. The idea of fighting for Queen and country is held tightly by those who never have and never will actually fight. It is held by those who long to bask in the reflected glory of war. It is held by those who have no experience of the suffering that war inflicts. And it is an idea held up by those who gain the most from war. Politicians, generals, the arms industry, and the media. Is it a phrase that is dredged up again and again to trifle dissent and build unquestioning support for the aggression that we choose to unleash? We must look at what lies behind this decrepit phrase. Who is it doing the fighting? A well-trained and professional force that's highest collective desire is to go to war. Any war. This force does not fight for Queen and country. It fights when it is told to fight. Even when the generals believe that a certain war is illegal or unwinnable? Well, if you believe the media or the citations written on medals awarded, you might imagine that the fighting involves bayonet charges or lone hand grenade assaults on enemy positions, or modern Spitfire pilots scrambling to some noble action. In my experience, the reality of war is a lot darker. Long periods of waiting, punctuated by unforeseen moments of extreme violence. Having your legs blown off by an IED. A supposed ally shooting holes in your chest. Dying in a helicopter crash. Burning to death in a transport plane. Being beaten to death by an angry mob. Being shot in the face as you break into someone's home. The reality is setting up thousands of checkpoints in the country that you have occupied, disrupting the lives of people, and then killing them when they approach too quickly or fail to stop in time. The reality is raiding people's houses, using explosives to gain entry into their homes, detaining previously unknown males, some as young as 15, and then handing them over to be tortured. Leaving their families to fend for themselves, traumatised by your action. The reality is killing people from the safety of an attack helicopter or drone control room, as if you were playing a computer game, with no regard for the lives of the people who have been dehumanised. Haji, raghead, sand nigger, chogi, argy, paddy, gook, chink, jap, kraut, hun, all terms used by our armed forces, a product of a society that still believes in its superiority over other peoples and cultures. We pretend that we wage war for higher, noble causes. We claim that our armed forces fight for freedom, democracy, or human rights. This is not the case. We wage war against generals, the arms industry, and the media. These scoundrels always predict victory, always insist that violence is the answer. They ignore the inevitability of unforeseen consequences, the existence of blowback, the fact that it is our own policy that creates our enemy. They deny when we have been defeated, to maintain support for current and future bloodletting. The reasons they give for starting wars rarely match the reasons that they give for continuing wars, and rarely match the actual outcomes. These people currently hold the noble position of backing a military junta in Mali against insurgents that they decided to arm in Libya. Before that, they celebrated the Arab Spring whilst turning a blind eye to Saudi Arabian aggression in Bahrain, where weapons that we supplied were used by our Saudi allies to kill civilians engaged in non-violent protest. Their silence in this matter sheds a light on their complicity. In both Iraq and Afghanistan, once the reasons for going to war were found to be false or unattainable, or were just forgotten, those with a vested interest in continuing the war resorted to one of the oldest tricks in the book. They cultivated the myth of the soldier as hero. They told you that you might not understand why the war continued, but that you should support the soldiers. And they told you that to stop the pointless slaughter would be sacrilege to those heroes that had already died. Truth is the first casualty of war, and tonight you will see this phenomenon firsthand. You will hear men speak in reasonable tones, using educated language to mount a defence of fighting for Queen and country. They will argue that at the very least we must be ready to defend this country, But they are talking about a hypothetical situation. The Taliban are not going to invade. The Chinese are not massing on the French coast. From positions of vested interest, they will try to convince you that fighting for your queen and country is your highest duty. But what they are really calling for is a continuation of business as usual, fighting and killing in accordance with their policy, which is designed to fulfill their interests, their greed, their ambition. I am a human being. My allegiance is not to Queen and country, but to the whole of humanity. I no longer accept to be complicit in the killing and torture of my brothers and sisters. Never again will I accept the vile religion of patriotism. I refuse to pull on that rancid uniform, and I refuse to fight for Queen and country.
Yeah, I hope you all heard that, but I thought it was quite a powerful speech, especially from someone who genuinely experienced conflict firsthand. What we really need to do is have these kind of conversations with our youth. We shouldn't just blame video games. We shouldn't just look towards an easy alternative to take away our moral responsibility as parents, as teachers, as whoever it may be. We need to encourage people to understand ethics in the first place and have critical thinking skills to be able to judge whether they, who are supposedly the leaders of our country, because we are a democracy, apparently. We're supposed to be a democratic environment in which these children will become free voters and able to lend their power towards the legislators, which will decide whether we do go to war or not. Well, surely they should understand whether we should in the first place before they are able to give their vote. What does their vote mean if they are ignorant to the consequences of it? And, you know, the problem is that this has more to do with population in the first place. What population is distant from, the ethical reality of our situation. And the only thing that we can do is try and educate the population in the first place. There's no point in trying to police the media. You know, I think, they tried to do this with comic books years ago. They tried to blame comic books for violence. And they were like saying that the silver age of comic books came around in response to, apparently children were becoming violent from reading, Batman. Well, Batman does not make kids into murderers, right? I mean, the Joker does not. No, but no, the Batman doesn't make kids into murderers. Ethical ignorance makes kids into murderers. Lack of humanity makes kids into murderers. If you don't want your kids to be school shooters, teach them compassion. Teach them caringness. Teach them love for humanity in general. Teach them love for sentient beings. Ask them the right questions and, expect them to be able to rationalize their own answers. Give them some moral responsibility before you start condemning them. How can we condemn these school shooters who have really had no moral education? Little to none. Who have been influenced by media sources that are supposedly be able to overcome because they're simply aging in our society. Yet they have no experience about right, wrong, good or bad in any way that isn't just provided within a saying at best. They've never actually had to engage with the concepts. And yet, we won't give anyone moral responsibility, but we will give them condemnation. And this is an issue. We need to resolve this. And this is what we need to change. I have another thing to play. Is me screen getting worse? Because it keeps saying I'm dropping frames, guys. Are you sure this is okay? Am I gonna watch this video back and be like, wow, this is awful? Like, you liars. Yeah, so the next thing I was gonna play was this. It's quite a short little Chris, if you with you being a mod, am I alright? See if you are, you know, just I'll take your word for it. Audio's 100%. Dropped a few frames now and again. Well, does keep it's watchable. Well, okay. Yeah. So, is it alright though? Alright, well, I'm going to try and give this a go. PowerPoint presentation. Is it really that bad, Magnus? Like, I'm being honest, yeah, is it actually that bad? Thing is, like, I say I did restart it. I'm not sure if it would even resolve it. The video freezes every couple of seconds. Right, well, I'm just going to restart the stream, guys. So just hang tight. I'll be right back. Right, so hopefully it's back and everything is okay. Yeah. Can you guys see us all right? Is everything okay now? I just restarted my stream. So yeah. Yeah, so you know what, actually, if it's back, I might have renamed the stream and I oh dear me. Well, I'll sort that out. I'll sort that out in a bit. Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna watch something else. I dropped a frame again. It says my CPU's doing fine. It can't be me. It can't be my computer. It must be me. Must be me bandwidth. That's incredibly frustrating. All right. Well, we'll just get through this stream, guys. I'm sure we'll make it through, and you know, hopefully it'll be all right. So I just want you to see this, and this is just another, you know, another thing to talk about in relation to this. You know, what is influence of children in video games, but in reference to the Call of Duty trailer, which is the primary one I'm talking about.
Can't get him off that thing. Up all night he is.
Stamina. Don't underestimate it.
Dedication! Ready, let's go!
That's just what we need!
So what I thought was the most, you know, profound thing here is that was the fact that he's actually a young lad. Like he barely looks old enough to be a soldier in the first place, right? And I know it's ridiculous because no one's going to join the military for this ad. Like, well, at least some people might, I suppose. But like, I used to think nobody thought that, you know, Nigel Farage was actually guaranteeing the NHS was going to get the money from Europe, right? But apparently people did. So, you know, I I can't genuinely like say this, but I mean, like, military ads have an effect. I mean, look at the Royal Marines ads. Like, it's a state of mind, and like there is like a glory with the military which we cannot deny. I mean, like the SAS, the Royal Marines, the would be liars if we said that they're not admirable in the sense of what they can accomplish. Like, I mean, they push the limits of human capabilities and stuff like that. So they end up gaining some admiration. Like, there's a story about these guys that climbed Mount Everest, and one of them broke their leg. Apparently the Royal Marines were climbing Mount Everest at the same time. Not all of them, of course. A group of Royal Marines. And apparently they came across this guy that was injured, and he was past the point of no return. And you're not supposed to help anyone. So one of the Royal Marines strapped him to his back and walked him down the mountain. And at the same time, the rest of the Royal Marines went and climbed Everest. And so it's this idea, like, like they do perform acts of like bravery, courage, and like amazing, like, feats of human capabilities, like human strength and agility and stuff like that. But on the other hand, the arbiters of state violence. And do we really want, like, would I want my son or daughter to join the Royal Marines or the British military? Absolutely not. First, I'd be like, well, one, I don't want you to get shot, and then two, like, are you doing the right thing? Like, can I really say that? Like, I mean, like, if, on the other hand, if we were fighting something like World War II, would I want my son to go? Well, I'd be like, well, everyone's sons have to go. We don't have a choice anymore. And that's how a just war comes around. The choice is almost taken out of your hands. It's like we can either, I've always said this, right? As well, like, just with the consequences of war, right? I used to say, join the military, like, lose your mind, lose your wife, lose your life. The consequences of it, like, go far beyond even just getting shot. Like, so you're losing your life, that's obvious, right? You can get your leg blown off by an IED, something like that. The physical consequences, they're obvious. They kind of pop in everyone's minds. Lose your wife. People don't understand the stress and strain that it can have on a family to be part of, like, the military institution. And it can be very difficult to deal with. And then three, would be lose your mind. You got things like perpetrator-induced traumatic syndrome, like PTSD, forms of PTSD that are incredibly difficult to deal with. And a lot of people just can't handle it. And not because they're weak mentally, it's because they can be very strong mentally. These are the same people doing amazing feats of strength who are having nervous breakdowns because they're not able to take the stress and strain that is placed upon them. The ethical ramifications of their actions go beyond all their consideration. And also the way that what military actually disciplines individuals to become soldiers now means that we kind of break people down and rebuild them, right? Like, it used to be that you were born a soldier. Like, now you're made into a soldier. Like, a soldier who was born was someone who was typically seen as, like, tall, straight backed, they come from a family that was typically military, so you were still being made to some degree. But the people who clearly could not fight wars, and they're turning them into individuals who are, cold-blooded killers, able to do anything on an order. Like, I mean, like, the disciplinary power of these institutions is incredibly, incredibly powerful. But I thought, like, on top of this, I wanted to kind of get into really what I thought the Call of Duty one, like, the Call of Duty advert had the most negative effects I could see from it. Because unlike other games, I could see far more, like, distant consequences that aren't just coming from gaming. And I think that relates to this almost destruction and this of ethics, this ethical ambiguity. And I don't like the norms it's propagating. I think that the norms that it's propagating is almost training young individuals to have an understanding of life which justifies the actions of the military on behalf of the organization, almost allowing you to go, well, you know, it's the right thing because our military does it, rather than question, is our military doing the right thing? This is what concerned us. So yeah, I mean, I hope this has all come through. I mean, obviously the stream's been dropping frames, so I hope it's not been too bad. But I'm gonna answer some comments and questions, and I just wanted to say, like, I don't see this as a product. I've played like games before I was 18, like that were 18s. I know everyone has, right? And I worked in a game store. Like, I can see parents come in, and I know they're buying them for their kids, but you gotta legally sell them to them anyway. And, you know, games don't necessarily have the same negative impacts as what the media says they do. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have these conversations, right? Like, if we know that our kids are all playing Call of Duty, we need to talk about warfare. You know, if we know that playing Grand Theft Auto, we know we need to talk about crime and organized crime and, you know, violent crime and stuff like that. You know, just as much as, like, we need to talk about video game addiction, and we need to talk about, you know, the other concepts that are conveyed within the media. And it's just like we're just understanding what's affecting our children, and, you know, having the conversations we should be having as parents, but as a broader society. We're not even having these conversations as adults. Okay, like, most people don't understand anything about, like, maybe even just war theory. Like, most people don't even question whether a war is right or wrong. They just kind of go along with it, right? And our society, like, even when we do protest, we don't even question why the protests don't work. Like, so yeah, like, I hope this is kind of answered. I hope this has kind of answered the questions. So now I'm going to swap to the chat, and I'm going to do, I'm going to, answer some of your actual questions. So if you've got there's any questions about this issue, perhaps we can, come to some conclusions. Oh, thank you very much. I've got this little vegan coconut thing. It's like I think this is coconut something, but it's coconut oil. But it's not, doesn't taste like coconut. This is actually salted caramel. It's delicious. These things are like the most smooth things ever, but like definitely like some of the worst vegan food for you. Because like all coconut oil, which is like 100% saturated fat, like 90% saturated fat rather. So yeah, like not healthy, but absolutely unreal. I saw Chris. You were talking about that you had a friend who joined the military and killed himself. I mean, that's something that I think we need to talk to our kids about. We've got and even like how we're caring about our children. Caring about our homeless veterans and people facing PTSD. We need to talk about these things, man. Like we talk about violence in video games, right? But when we blame video games, we never blame ourselves. Like, we should. Like, it's like Call of Duty shouldn't be a bigger influence on your child's life than you are. So Chris said that one of his best friends killed himself after killing over 100 people in Iraq. And he used to say he doesn't want to live anymore because he had no reason to. Reason to get out of bed any day. Apparently he was a really lovely person. Somebody said something about like, how could you be a lovely person and kill someone? Well, because you think you're doing it for the right reasons, don't you? Like, people said this in World War II. Like, people couldn't pull the trigger in World War II. There was so many people that couldn't actually pull the trigger to shoot someone. My granda even said, like, he's when he was in Palestine, someone had to pull a gun. Like, they had to hit him, and he was like, I won't shoot anyone. He's like, I won't do it. And he was like, so they were like, either you shoot them or I'm gonna shoot you, right? And this happens, right? But the military has a way of making you into an individual who not only wants, you want to follow orders, you want to do your duty, and whatever they tell you to do, you know. I mean, have you ever heard of like the Americans? Like, ours is not the reason why, ours is but to do or die. The thing is, they are reasoning, right? They know that there's something right or wrong throughout all of it, which is why they end up with PTSD, you know, because they can come to the conclusions that, you know, this isn't all right. It's not just the threat of violence towards themselves that causes PTSD, it's the perpetration of violence. And I remember seeing, like, not long ago, there was a guy in the corner, like, chippy, and he was drunk. And he was like, I was a Marine, and he was saying how he was really struggling. He was like, it really messed him up. He's like, why we're getting sent to kill the poor in other countries? And he's like, that's all it is. And he said, he was like, so they said to him, they're like, do you wish you never joined the Marines? And he was like, absolutely. He's like, I definitely wish I'd never joined the Marines. But like, these people, like, you're in a situation, I mean, like, as well, like, you know, you ask, like, how could you kill 100 people? I mean, it depends on the circumstances. I mean, you could kill 100 people if 100 people are trying to kill you, right? Like, we're just disconnected from our overall society, from our overall, like, global community, where humanity itself that permeates our being. And because of that, we're able to, you know, not only just able to pull the trigger, but like we rely upon the ideology that permeates our being, right? I don't think people realize like how powerful ideological power is. Like, it's you know, I'm doing this as I say ideology. It's almost like the spirit of Zizek is flowing through my body. But ideology can permeate like another will through our hands, right? This is why, like, someone like Nietzsche, and if what have our children do, you know, philosophy, they could understand that, you know, sometimes other wills can act upon us through the objects of ideology and ideological power, like through like our will. It may appear to be us, but it's not us in the first place. That's why we can do things that contradict our values, because, or we could be mistaken on our values. You know, we could be absolutely fine with killing people when we're in the military, but then, you know, regenerate the compassion and caringness for humanity when we come out and realize that actually, oh my God, I've done all this and it's just wrong. You know, I shouldn't have done this. A guy called Dermalogical Cream says, we're disconnected from love. We're disrespecting each other. Whatever happened to protecting each other from poisoned your body and your soul for a minute of pleasure, but the damage that you've done is gonna last forever. Well, yeah, it will last forever, but only, like, the thing is that, like, who's done the damage to you, right? Like, why have you been sent to this war zone? Why are we sending people, young individuals, to these places, these inhospitable environments, telling them that they're doing this for Queen and country, but in reality they're doing it for the vested interests of, like, you know, of a power structure? And, you know, some people can disagree. They can say, like, you know, sometimes we do need to go to war, and, you know, fair enough. Like, you can debate it on us. You can debate me on it. That's fine. But we don't even have a population that understands what a just war is in the first place. So we really need to have these conversations, man. Like, this is where we need to talk about, this is what we need to talk about in relation to, like, video games and violence, or, you know, video games and warfare. We need to talk about ethics in the first place. Magnus asked us to read an article in The Guardian. Oh my God. So the title of the article on The Guardian, and, you know, everyone should take all news outlets with a pinch of salt, right? A lot of them have vested interests in the first place. The media itself can be corrupt. And, you know, try and think for yourself, is this true? You know, see what the reasons they gave and the justifications. and whether the sources match up and stuff like that. Don't just hear, listen to what you hear and take it for granted. Actually challenge it, right? So this article is called U.S. Energy Department Rebrands Fossil Fuels as Molecules of Freedom, right? Press release from the department said that its increasing export capacity is critical to spreading freedom gas throughout the world. America is the land of freedom, as any politician will happily tell you. What they don't quite hear so often is that the stuff under the land is also apparently made of freedom as well. That is at least according to news release from the Department of Energy. Mark Menes, the U.S. Undersecretary of Energy, bestowed a peculiar honorific on our continent's natural resources, dubbing it freedom gas, in release touting the DOE's approval of increased exports of natural gas produced by Freeport LNG as allies a diverse and affordable source of clean energy, he said. The concept of freedom gas may seem amorphous, but it's actually being measured down to the smallest unit. With the US another year of record-setting natural gas production, I am pleased that the Department of Energy is doing what it can to promote an efficient regulatory system that allows for the molecules of US freedom to be exported to the world. And isn't there an irony that, this all makes sense now? They're telling us we're fighting for freedom. We are fighting for freedom, but that's the name of the gas. But I mean, this kind of does show you a mentality that is being invoked, that it is freedom itself that we are fighting for, and freedom is the resource. I mean, but first, let's not talk about freedom from fossil fuels. I mean, that would be ridiculous, right? Because now we're talking about freedom from freedom. So you don't even question that we'll want to be free from fossil fuels and, talk about how we don't want to destroy our habitats, our climates, and, all of this. But, this idea is it's what energy supplies that make us free. And maybe, they're trying to point out, maybe free from the clutches of the evil Russian, oligarchs who are trying to spread their gas around the world, but we're going to beat them by spreading our gas around the world because we're the free ones. But why can't we just use renewables, man? Why can't we start investing in alternative forms of energy, even wave, man, or nuclear fusion? I know nuclear fusion is far off, so I'm not jumping any physics jumping through physics holes here, because I know that we're nowhere near nuclear fusion. But why aren't we investing into energy sources that aren't profitable? Because let's say someone did invent nuclear fusion, let's say we did get it, what corporation would benefit from that? I mean, unless energy prices remain the same, then oil companies are gone. I mean, they're absolutely obliterated. Some energy company would be an absolute conglomerate. But I just think that it's I think it's a scary thought anyway, this idea of freedom gas, right? We should not associate our freedom as an individual, as a state, with a resource. That's not how it works. It's unclear if members of the Trump administration attempting to assign patriotic intentions to natural gas are aware of the silliness of the concept, but Rick Perry seems to believe it. Quote, 75 years after liberating Europe from Nazi Germany occupation, the United States is again delivering a form of freedom to the European continent. Can we just appreciate America did not liberate us from the Nazi occupation, but America would have been conquered if it wasn't for all being good, right? The USSR was not a good state. It was actually very evil. And the Russian state now could only be considered the only thing probably worse. So, well, maybe not worse, but they're still not very good. But this idea that they did nothing, they only lost 70% of their population or something, they had 70% of the casualties rather, Like, more Russians died than British, French, and Americans put together. But, they didn't do anything. And it's just like, if it wasn't for the Eastern Front holding throughout the onslaught that they faced, and then overall, like, managing to push back, the Western Front would have collapsed off all of the troops moving from the Eastern Front, pushing back to the West, and we would have had no chance of taking what was, the bulwark of Europe. I mean, D-Day was a good explanation of that. You've got people running onto beaches just being mowed down, which is another thing. I mean, you had, like, an ex-Nazi crying about what he did. Like saying that the reason that they stopped killing people, like, in the sense that he fought in D-Day, and he said they were just mowing people down, and he said the reason that they stopped is because they ran out of bullets, right? And then they were fighting hand to hand. Like, it's amazing, right? Like this is the kind of, like, barbarity that goes on in war, which is why someone like Sun Tzu says, any man who wishes for war surely hasn't been in it. Yeah, I think that's, unfortunately, like, the stories of history that were forgotten are, like, from the soldiers that tell us not to go to war. And I think that's why Ben Griffin talks so well when he says, like, we're actually only propagating a single ideological stance that has vested interests within it, and it's the media, and the aristocracy, the corporations that benefit, and it's this perverse, like, agenda that is permeating our soldiers that go to war, and the fingers that pull the trigger relate far more to those, characters who are profiting, off the bullets being fired than those men and women who are on the ground. And I think that can be seen from the existential guilt that permeates their whole being, which is the PTSD rates and stuff. Anyway. And rather than in a form of young American soldiers, it is the form of liquefied natural gas. That's what they said. As the crisis escalates, this is still The Guardian. In our natural world, we refuse to turn away from the climate catastrophe and species extinction, which is mostly related to animal agriculture, by the way. For The Guardian, reporting on the environment is a priority. We are reporting on climate, nature, and pollution in the prominence it deserves, stories which often go unreported by others in the media. Okay? And at the pivotal time for our species and our planet, right? Blah, 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 blah. Isn't The Guardian great? And the funny thing is that, like, The Guardian at the same time, like, politically were undermining people like Jeremy Corbyn. So, who was pushing for the gravity of climate change and stuff like that. So The Guardian are not neutral, nor is any, media outlet. So always take them with a pinch of salt. Magnus says, has Russia been unfairly demonized? Is Russia-phobia rampant within the West, considering the lack of ideological differences between our nations? Well, what can I say in the sense that, like, one, I mean, what we're talking about is really, I think that Russia and China are far more closely, China especially is more nationalist, but, like, the nationalism still poses somewhat of a threat. I mean, a lot of the resources are owned privately by Putin, and those close to him. So even though it's capitalist, it's an oligarch related to those who are in political control directly. And it's whether the interests of those individuals imply a certain offensive measure against Europe. But I think it's ironic that we call Russia, dangerous. But, like, America holds so many army bases. It holds, and this is NATO as well. It holds so many army bases that will hold like, really, America holds the largest military in the world, constantly on high alert, ready to fight, pretty much. So I don't think Russia is the scariest one, right? Like, I mean, if I was a country thinking about going socialist, let's say, I mean, like, I say I'm in control of a country and I was thinking about going socialist, I'd be like, I wouldn't be like, what's Russia gonna do? I'd be like, oh God, America's gonna come break my door down. Shit. Or I'm like, oh well, America's actually going to remove all of my nation's wealth is going to leave in the form of those political aristocrats, and America's going to spread misinformation and propaganda that supports an alternative rising group to plant a despotic government that wasn't elected in the first place. You know, like, I certainly wouldn't be as scared of Russia as I am America, but I certainly wouldn't be, you know, like, unaware of Russia's existence. I mean, imagine being a small state in the world today. It's just you just gotta, you know, you just gotta go with the flow. You've got no power, right? It's globalized revolution that we need if we were to look at like how we should like free ourselves from, you know, any given authority, like globalized power networks involved with corporations. There's no way that we could do it without like global like unity. But whether we need that or whether we want that in the first place is the questions that we want to ask, right? Like, the point of this video I'm trying to say really is just to get our children and our young people talking to their parents and talking to the institutions and institutionally about ethical dilemma. You know, whether we want to live in the state that propagates like perhaps unnecessary violence, or you know, even first, is this violence unnecessary? Should we be committing these wars and acts of offensive acts against other nations and other peoples? You know, what are the rules of conflict? What should be the rules of conflict? Like, how should we approach, you know, these scenarios? And, you know, if we ask these questions, perhaps we would actually manage to solve some of our problems. Like, you know, but, you know, yeah. So, Dermalogical Cream says, where was it gone? I just read it. Our souls want peace, our true selves, but the media has distracted and conditioned us from what we really are. They've made us into a mass bunch of ego-driven consumer slaves with limited empathy. Well, no, I don't believe that. Not because I don't believe the last part of what you said about we're a mass bunch of ego-driven consumer slaves with limited empathy. Yeah, that's true. Like, a lot of our population are actually like would be adequately categorized into that, and we are distracted by the media. Potentially, like, I do want people to think about this themselves. Like, obviously, whatever I'm saying, question it just as much as you would question anything else. That's the whole point of philosophy. I don't tell you what the truth is. You go work the truth out. But when you say like our souls want peace, our true selves, nah. You know, people like Thomas Hobbes argue that, you know, human nature is naturally like ego driven in the first place. Now, I don't propagate either Thomas Hobbes or Rousseau, this idea of a noble savage. We're actually good by nature. Neither are we bad by nature, but we're kind of blank slates, and we can be made into pretty much anything. And that means that that just gives more control over our culture and the institutions which permeate ideology into cultural hegemony and so on, and concepts like that. It really it really only propagates how much control like these organizations and, you know, ideological stances can actually have over it. It doesn't limit it. Like, it doesn't and I think it's closer to the truth, because I think when we look at human nature, really we just compare like two societies and look for commonalities, like points of like overlap, and we use that cultural overlap as, you know, justification for like a abstract theory of human nature, even if there is another, you know, nation that's totally different. And even a bunch of people, like, we don't need whole nations. We can have like bunches of people, like small select groups of people. Now, are they just defying their nature? Like, what is it? And I think that this is the point. We jump to conclusions too much. And I don't think humans are good or bad. I think we can be either. He also says the only solution for peace is increasing the height of your spirituality. I think it's reason. I think it's rationality. It has less to do with the spiritual and more to do with the rational. The spiritual can be totally hijacked. I mean, you could have like a spiritual experience and, you know, be told that you are doing the right thing when you murder an animal in the way like that. And too many times is like spirituality being hijacked. Look at it like this, right? Like Zizek quotes this guy, I can't remember his name, is it? But he says, you know, if left alone, good people would be doing good things, bad people would be doing bad things, but only something like religion can make good people do bad things, right? And I think Kant and Hegel really point this out. No, not Kant. Hegel points this out about Kant, that goodwill, even, like thinking you're doing good is not enough. You've got to know you're doing good. And to know you're doing good is to rely upon other individuals. And before you can rely upon other individuals, you've got to be able to understand that your ideology is not being constructed from an outside source, and it's actually being constructed in those relationships in the first place. That you are a participating member and you're using your reason, and that somebody else is participating using their reason, and we're trying to forward our understandings of truth and reality together. And I think that is how we overcome violence, hatred, and, you know, the egoism and the consumerism that permeates our society. Yeah, well, I'll probably pop over to Vegan Gains' stream myself. Like, I do tend to do that. I quite like watching the guy stream. Yeah. Magnus says, will capitalism collapse on its own? I've become convinced it can self-propel for as long as there are humans to buy. Well, Lenin seemed to think that capitalism was going to self-destruct. I think he didn't have... I think he had too much optimism, you know. Instead, if we don't do something about, you know, rampant capitalism, then we're going to face some perhaps life-threatening scenarios, like with climate change and so on. I think veganism, I know people are going to think I'm mad for saying this, veganism is by far the most effective form of not anti-capitalist but anti-consumerist ideology that has permeated our society, where individuals start understanding themselves as genuinely affecting the supply and demand of our society and trying to do something about the institutions which are affecting us. Like trying to make broad change by operating within the institution. Right? We don't need to overthrow capitalism because we don't know what to replace it with. We don't know how we're going to, to build a society from the bottom up. What the hell we're going to do? We don't know what we're doing. So what we need to do is really just work within the institutions, in the sense that we do the most ethical thing within capitalism, and then once we hit a point of contradiction, we can make a small step into a new institution rather than one giant leap into a whole economic system. And I think that's something that we need to consider. I remember arguing for this during my degree. I said that we need a meritocracy before we need socialism. We need to understand that we're moving towards a fairer society in the first place before we can just jump to an abstract, goal. And it's this abstractness. That means it's just an idea. It doesn't hold any real concepts, any reality, anything tangible. It can't positively construct a society from that. And I think that's what people forget. We're just missing a few steps, and we can't do that. And yeah, veganism can solve everything, man. Veganism's great. Honestly, the best decision I've ever made, but its ethical ramifications are so profound. Ethical consumerism for the first time, really for the first time on a global scale. That's amazing. Genuine appreciation for the environment and for what's causing environmental degradation. Appreciation for sentience and what it means to care about ethics, and ethics itself is being appreciated. Like, we are seeing a shift in human consciousness, in my opinion, with veganism. Like, it genuinely changed the way I looked at the world in the first place. It just changed the way I looked at the world. Dermalogical Cream says, by the way, when I said increase spirituality, I mean expand your consciousness. I don't mean as a religion thing at all. Religions have some merit, but it has been corrupt. Well, yeah, like, it has been corrupted. Yeah, I understand what you're saying with spiritual awakening, but I don't trust feelings at all, right? People's feelings, people could feel like they're doing the right thing, and they're actually doing the wrong thing. People can have goodwill and act in a notion that they're doing something justified, and that they think that this is right. I don't care. Right? Like, I have no doubt that people like Hitler and his subordinates had an understanding of morality that was such that when they thought they were seizing control of Germany to do the disgusting actions that they did, which I have no doubt, like, undermined many of the morals of the German population as a whole, and then, you know, forced the German population into ideological, like, submission, that they thought they were justified in doing it for the greater good. But it's this kind of subjectivism that is evil itself. It's evil incarnate. Like, the concept that you're doing good for any notion that is not the rationality that is within our institutions, like, without appealing to an objective standard, then you could be forwarding absolute evil. You know, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Chris says that the reason he probably views war so bad now is because of veganism. And it's probably that, and that what it done to your friend there. I think that's probably quite awful as well. Magnus, do you not fear that as a movement grows, it will be corrupted by... as I say corrupted, I think, yeah, corrupted by capitalists, i.e. the corporate... yeah, that we've seen this in this Pride Month. Yeah. Magnus, I will say this, right? Like, in a sentence in which I understand that I don't think you meant that as a derogatory word, but in the stream, when you're talking about, you know, I don't know, something like homosexuality, yeah, I understand the concept. I'm going to delete that word. I'm going to delete that off the stream. But, yeah, I'll reply to it because I know what you are trying to get at. Not actually sure how to delete that, Chris. Do you know how to delete that? Anyway. Yeah, like, I don't want to put you in a timeout because I don't think you deserve that. If I will it remove the comment? I mean, I'll answer it first anyway. So, the point of what I'm trying to get at here is that, yeah, like, of course, like, veganism could be infiltrated by corporate entities, and it already has in many ways, you know, like, you know, corporations, you know, it's people like, you know, Earthling Ed, Gary Yourofsky, there's just, yeah, Earthling Ed, Gary Yourofsky, who else? You know, James Aspey, you know, Joey Cobstrong. I mean, Joey's titles are somewhat weird. Joey, you need to fix that. You can't have vegan mukbang in the same sentence as I put a gun in my mouth, right? But, come on, man. But I think that, yeah, I think that I think veganism could be infiltrated in the sense that, you know, capitalist organizations could, you know, hegemonically hijack the notions behind it. But I don't think they can attack the concept of speciesism, which permeates through the whole movement. I just don't think they can. Could they maybe sell us something like that, obscures the truth? Absolutely. Could they, try and use it as a way to brand their corporation as good and to promote a capitalist agenda? Absolutely. But I don't think they can undo the moral progress being made by veganism in relation to animals, at least. Ethical consumerism, I can see them trying to undermine that. But I think that the more that they try and brand themselves as vegan, the beautiful thing is, the more they use it, the more they are ultimately proving that it's working. That ethical consumerism is permeating the markets. Scott Plug says, "The clock is ticking. The end is coming. There will be no warning." Well, was it like, in the words of Epicurus, don't fear God, don't fear death. What is good is easy to get. What is painful is easy to endure. I have no problems, mate. The end does come. Then it's probably best that we don't have a warning for it in the first place. I saw this thing as well, this meme a while ago, and it was this guy holding up this sign that says, "The end is near." And it was a guy behind him, and it's just holding up a sign saying, "This will never end." And there's a speech bubble coming out of his mouth, and he says, your optimism disgusts me." And it's just this idea that, what is it that, the end of what? Yeah, I think I'm probably going to call the stream now, guys, because it's quite late here, and I know I'm dropping frames and stuff. Yeah, and I do agree with you, by the way, Chris. Joey Cobstrong needs to fix up a few things, no offense to Joey, because I think he's a cool guy. Was it Michael Jackson? I've never heard Michael Jackson shout. I've heard many Michael Jackson songs, but anyway, yeah, with Joey, like, he's he's a good guy, man. He's just, I think he's misguided with those titles, man, and I think he's having a bad. So he's not a bad guy, but he needs to change those titles. I know he's trying to be a bit provocative and stuff, and thought provoking, but you cannot have vegan pancake mukbang in the same sentence as I put a gun in my mouth. I'm sorry. I know YouTube works by doing this sort of stuff, but that's not how you do it, right? Anyway, yeah, guys, this has been fun, and hopefully I managed to permeate a message of trying to get people to talk about the actual issue, which in relation to video games, and actually talk about ethics in the first place, rather than just jump to conclusions like we should ban or legislate against video games, because I do not want that. I'm a gamer, right? So, have the tough conversations, play some games, and as always, try it again some